Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. Here on The Point of View, we get the right topics, we pick the right guests and ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. We're back on the economy because the Bank of Ghana has released their annual reports and their financial statements dated, of course, it came out 31st of May this year. That's a couple of days ago. We'll be jumping into the report to speak to the Director of Research about the highlights of the report, what it means for the health of the central bank, the financial sector in general, and where the economy is and the role of the central bank in helping to create a better economy for all of us. Stay with us. Welcome back. So tonight my guest is Dr. Philip Abradu Otu, who is the Director of Research at the Central Bank, and he's here to help us appreciate the details or the important highlights of their latest annual reports. Doc, welcome to the show. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
How are you doing?
Well, I'm okay. I'm fine.
Busy time for everybody.
Busy times.
I can imagine.
Busy times.
The report was released without much fanfare. I think some of us saw it over the weekend. Was it deliberate? Because usually these things, when they come out, the media talks a lot, but I didn't get to see the report until over the weekend. Any particular reason for this?
No particular reason. We had up to May 31st to issue the report. Actually, the report should have been issued on March 31st.
Okay.
I think that's the constitutionally mandated time that the report had to be issued, but the auditors had some issues. They were going on and on. They needed to do more work, and therefore we saw it fit to ask for some extension to get the report done. Normally when this happens, we get that extension from the Minister of Finance.
Wonderful.
So yes, it was extended to May 31st and we issued it at that time.
But usually the BOGs and annual reports don't generate that much interest in the media. I think it is only, if my memory serves, last year that it became topical. So this is true, and it's possibly because of the impairments and the big losses.
And the big losses last year because of the DDEP. We kept saying it that the DDEP had a huge impact on our balance sheet. And if you go through our statements over the past 10 years, you are likely not to see these huge losses. So it's that huge loss of 60.8 billion that raised eyebrows and brought all these issues to the fore. Of course, we explained a lot last year what was going to happen in 2023, and therefore, naturally, people will be ready to watch out for what was going to come in 2023.
So this one, because of last year, we are more interested, and we'll get into the details.
Yeah.
But when we say Bank of Ghana, what do you do? Because a lot of people think you guys have a lot of money, and you are supposed to supply money when there isn't enough in the system. So if people are broke and people can't get access to loans, it's like, what's the Bank of Ghana doing? What's your role as a central bank in an economy like Ghana?
No, so let me just put it up front that our main role is to stabilize prices in the economy, period. So all what we do is geared towards price stabilization in the economy. The question is, how do we stabilize prices, and what tools do we have at our disposal to stabilize prices? But for you to stabilize prices, you need to have full information about what is going on in the economy, especially regarding the factors that impact on inflation. Then you can deploy the tools to attack whatever factors that you think are driving inflation. So our mandate, the pure mandate that we have, which is in the Act, is to stabilize prices and make sure that we don't get inflation running away.
So you think the most important mandate is price stability? What about exchange rate stability? What about financial sector stability and development? What about employment? They are not direct responsibility of the central bank?
Well, you see, they say, seek ye first thy economic kingdom and all things shall follow. When you're able to get the macro right, all these other things fall in place. If your macro conditions are not right, inflation is running at 100%, what would you expect in such an economy? Total chaos. That inflation rate of 100% impacts the banks. It impacts businesses' ability to borrow and expand. Unemployment is also a factor in there. Unemployment will rise. So the macro is very, very, very important. Get the macro right, get inflation right, get fiscal policy right. Let these two things interface, and then the impact on the economy will be one that will ensure that businesses can borrow. Inflation is low. The central bank, when inflation is low, will ensure that interest rates also come down low, and all these things support a healthy economy.
So if I get you right, the most important thing you are supposed to do is to maintain low inflation.
Stabilize prices, maintain low inflation, and we have a target. And that medium-term target is to get inflation to around 8%. And we believe that when inflation is around 8%, we've done studies. When inflation is around 8% and interest rates also hover around 13%, roughly 14%, it's a good time for the economy to breathe. It's a good time for businesses to borrow. It has happened before in the economy. And we believe that when inflation drops to those low levels, the economy gets some breather.
So if stable prices is your most important responsibility, and our price levels have been very high for the past 2.5 years or more, can we say then the central bank is failing at its job?
Well, so one thing we also need to know is the factors that impact on inflation. Is it driven from domestic sources, or these are factors that are also coming from external sources? So you need to make that distinction clear, and you need to analyze, make that distinction, and then deploy the tools that you have. If inflation is coming from external sources, there is very little that you can do. Then you need to look at the domestic sources and see whether from the domestic sources these are supply-driven factors or demand-driven factors, and you deploy the tools to attack this. But the problem also is that when inflation is coming from external sources and it feeds into the psyche of pricing in the economy, and you do nothing about it, it gets embedded. So you would see that the external factors gets entrenched in the domestic pricing behavior, and it's a problem.
So you're saying that some of the causes of inflation are beyond your control?
Yes.
So apart from the central bank, who else can control inflation?
Well, so then we shift a little bit to structural policies. What can we do as far as structural policies are concerned to boost supply of goods and services in the economy, to boost foodstuff? If you check the inflation that has happened over the past 2 years, food inflation has been very substantial. Is it the central bank's business to get into controlling food supply? Then we'll be shifting away from our mandate. Food supply issues are left for other sectors of the economy to deal with.
But in some countries, I am told the Nigerian Central Bank has an interest in a program they call the Anchor Lenders Program, where they, through a certain vehicle, make money available to produce rice, for example, because they've seen the pass-through effect of imported rice on inflation, and therefore they've tried to control inflation until recently, when they devalued the currency. The Anchor Lenders Program, spearheaded by the central bank, was meant to tame food inflation in particular.
Did it? Well, the numbers that I saw, I wasn't too...
So does that mean we shouldn't try at all? At least they interpret their mandate.
I wasn't too comfortable.
Yeah, but you see, Doc, the fact that it may not have worked does not mean... My question is the Central Bank of Ghana not limiting its tools? Because your colleagues in Nigeria obviously see the importance of food inflation and therefore encourage a specific type of lending to produce food to offset imports. You've not done that as a central bank, and not you, for the past 20 whatever years. Is it that the Ghanaian Central Bank has a restricted view of its role? Because you just told me that there's a difference between inflation, which is internal, and inflation that's coming from outside. So why aren't you trying to tackle the cost push ones with production, encouraging the institutions with specific guidelines as to where you encourage them to lend, so that your mandate of price stability, you're able to achieve it?
So why shouldn't we be getting the Ministry of Agric to embark on policies to boost food production? Is it the role of the central bank?
Because nobody's lending to Agric.
The last time I checked the Nigerian Central Bank balance sheet, they had things like stock of rice on their balance sheet. Is that what we want as a central bank? I don't know.
It's what we want as a country. We are not here to compare central bank balance sheet. We are here to compare economies and food prices. Ghana's inflation, I'm told you can't compare inflation country to country, but if you look within West Africa, our inflation has been the highest since records started, since 2000. Generally, our inflation levels are in the 20s. As we speak, end of year, Kenya inflation was about 7%, Zambia was about 12%, Ghana was hovering about 30 at the time, 2023 November. So clearly we have an inflation problem.
Well, we do, but you are talking about Kenya, you are talking about Zambia. If you look at across the West African sub-region,
no country in West Africa has inflation above 25%.
But you know why? They've pegged their currencies. Is that what we want as a country? Do we want to peg and fix the exchange rate to the dollar and say by fiat, this is what the exchange rate should be? We should maintain an exchange rate of 12 or 10 to the dollar, and that's it? I don't think so. It's because those countries have pegged their currencies to the euro. That is why they're able to achieve such low inflation. We have a different framework. That conversation is a different conversation altogether. We have a different framework, and we've opted to go for a flexible exchange rate regime. If we want to abandon that regime, it's another matter for discussion.
Your main tool you've tried to use to control inflation has been interest rates. That essentially is the policy announcement.
Yeah.
It hasn't seemed to have worked.
Why do you say that?
Because inflation rates have not responded very positively to those rate changes.
So the use of the interest rate as a tool is basically, from the central bank's point of view, is to curb excessive aggregate demand pressures. So when you determine that there are aggregate demand pressures in the economy, the best tool that you have to use is the interest rate tool. And look at what happened in 2023. Inflation at the end of 2022 moved all the way to 54%. Look at the response that came from the central bank that moved interest rates significantly up in the economy. We also responded significantly, and we moved interest rates by 1,550 basis points. At the end of the day, come 2023, inflation slipped all the way from 54 to 23%. It's policies.
But we can debate that.
Yeah,
we can debate policies. That on two levels. The fact that inflation reduced from 54 to 23 may not necessarily be because of your interest rate policy.
But what?
The inflation that is reducing is the year-on-year inflation. And year-on-year inflation essentially measures the rate of price increase now to a year before. So by November, when the inflation figure you quote happened, the previous year had a very exceptional rate of price increase. So even though prices were still rising in November 2023, compared to November 2022, it was just 23%. That does not mean your policy is working. It just means that the terrible situation we had in 2022 November was not what we saw in 2022-23 November. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was your rate that caused the reduction.
But you know very well also that policies could have been loose, and that decline that you are talking about may not even happen, and inflation could still stay at that very high levels. Policies can be very loose. and that expected decline that you are talking about. That so you are saying that even if the economy was on autopilot, that decline in inflation will come. It's not true. You know why? If the central bank had continued financing the budget, injecting liquidity to support the budget, you think that kind of drop in inflation would have come? No. If we had kept real interest rates loose, and by real interest rates, I mean the difference between the nominal rate of 29 and then where inflation is, there is always a real interest rate that agents are always looking at.
But okay, so you're admitting in your answer that some of the inflation was because you financed the government, based on what you just said. So it's not all of it which was just an interest rate phenomenon. Some of the inflation was because of central bank financing of government budget.
You know, anybody who understands these things will know that some of the inflation that we had in 2022 was as a result of monetary financing of the budget. I think we've repeatedly said that in a lot of our statements. But the question is,
so what I'm saying
let me
the reduction in inflation was because you reduced that financing, and what percentage was because you increased the interest rate?
So let me explain. I think in 2022 we started the year 2021. We ended 2021 with inflation of around probably was it around 13 thereabout, and then by the end of 2022 it had shot up to 54. So we had additional inflation to the economy was about 40%. So 40% was added to where we added on to 2021 to get to that 54. The big question is, if you decompose that 40% additional inflation that we had, there's a component that was due to monetary financing. We admit that 11%, roughly 11% of that was due to the monetary financing that we did. Okay, then the question is, having taken 11% out of that, what percentage was due to petroleum prices? What percentage was due to electricity? What percentage was due to food? If you break them down, you will see. So the monetary financing, yes, but the question which we kept explaining last year was, we had to step in to avoid a total collapse of the economy. And that is why we had to come in with that monetary financing. And remember, when the IMF came in and we had that discussion with them about monetary financing, their answer was that this is although this is suboptimal. I'm trying to remember the exact language that was used at the time. Yeah. They were saying that although it's suboptimal because we are not supposed to be financing the budget, it was a necessary thing that we needed to do to prevent the economy from collapse. That suboptimality added that additional 11% to inflation. We haven't done that since we started the program in 2023, and it contributed to the rapid decline. My point that I'm raising is, if we had still continued,
it should have been worse.
It would have been worse. And then that base drift that you seem to be talking about would not even have come.
At the risk of sound overstretching the issue, within that same November 2022, portfolio investors withdrew a lot of their investments from Ghana because the Fed in the US had increased their rates. So there was an outflow of capital from Ghana. Now, what that did was that it made it tougher for the Ghanaian currency because there was a lot of demand for foreign currency.
I mean, these are some of the external factors.
So what I'm trying to say is that 54 inflation, possibly the 40 you gave me, 11 of it could have been from your financing, but some of it was also cost push, because once your currency starts falling, everything else becomes more expensive because you import oil, you pay for power in dollars, you import rice. So my point is that a lot of the inflation may have been cost push. So why does the central bank insist on raising the monetary policy rate as your main tool for fighting inflation, when this very basic disaggregation we've done suggests that some of the inflation is driven by what you've explained, some of it is driven by external factors. In fact, the exchange rate.
Oh, by the way, so when I listed those factors, I even left out the exchange rate.
Yes.
The exchange rate also has an impact on inflation.
So why do you keep raising the interest rate? Because the point about the interest rate is that it works in advanced economies where there's a high savings rate. Most people in Ghana hardly save. When you raise the interest rate, you're trying to mop up excess liquidity. People don't have money. You are not encouraging anybody to save. So that idea that raising this interest rate 30%, 29%, the 150 basis points, it just impoverishes people. It doesn't really deal with inflation. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
It's supposed to attack the excess liquidity that we have in the economy and prevent that excess liquidity from going into the exchange rate market. When that excess liquidity spills over into the exchange rate market, it's disaster. And that is what we try to do.
And this excess liquidity is where? In the banks or people's pockets. Because within that period that the currency was falling, most people said they didn't have money. So when you say there's excess liquidity,
you might not see where the excess...
Where is the excess liquidity? Because people were struggling. I mean, the one way you can tell if there's... Look, the Composite Index of Economic Activity, which you publish from July 2022 all the way to March 2023, it came into negative in August and was negative up until Q2 of 2023. Now, that composite index is an indicator of many things.
Yeah.
So you cannot tell me there's excess liquidity in the country when productivity is that low. Clearly, there's something missing from the way, not you, the central bank fights inflation with this interest rate thing, which baffles me. And I'm not the only person. Many people have written about this.
Well, but so I don't know why you're bringing in the composite index of economic activity, but it has nothing to do with liquidity. It's a real indicator which tells us how the real sector is performing, and the reason why the composite index of economic activity slipped to those low levels takes its source from the COVID era as well. We realized that in our surveys, a lot of companies had to close down post-COVID. Okay, and therefore, what the CIEA was capturing, okay.
But don't forget, economic activity also includes spending.
Well,
so the reason I pull that is that if people have excess money, they will spend more. And yet they are not spending.
So in that indicator, we have something we called a VAT. And you know what a VAT does? The VAT, by construct, is supposed to capture spending. So the VAT is a spending indicator. And when you see that VAT going down, it's an indication that people don't have liquidity to spend.
It could also mean that the tax authorities are not capturing their inefficient. So you cannot use, because again, in the same data you showed, when you look at your retail sales and VAT, they don't necessarily go along the same line. So we cannot use VAT collection as the best proxy for spending, because there are many people who do issue non-VAT invoices. So I'm just saying that.
But mind you, that indicator is just a proxy to give us an indication of what.
Last point on inflation.
No, but let's get back to the CIEA.
Yes.
You know, the CIEA also has indicators like tourist arrivals.
Yes.
It has indicators like import.
Yes.
You recollect during the COVID era for some time, when we shut down the economy, what we did basically was to approximate the economy to a closed economy. So that aspect of
affected it.
It affected it.
Figures I'm talking about.
It affected it.
I'm talking about CIA. We've showed it on this screen before. Most of my viewers have seen it. But last point. Do you think that, and this is not me now, Toby Afede said that using CPI and trying to look at it for specific items like the fuel and food may be more useful than year-on-year inflation, because as I pointed out, year-on-year inflation is more important in telling you how the rate is changing now compared to last year. But inflation should be forward-looking. So using that 50% inflation to therefore set your interest rate to try and cool it down, you are looking at the wrong inflation. You should look at a different inflation measure. He's been making this argument since 2003. The central bank has been writing back to him back and forth. But if for the past 20 years, inflation is high, don't you think it's time to listen to his analysis?
If you look at the work of the Monetary Policy Committee, we have 5 measures of inflation that we look at. And these 5 measures of inflation that we look at each stage excludes some of the things Togbi is talking about. Okay, we have one that excludes all food items from the basket. If you did that, if you exclude all food items from the basket, the question is, where is inflation now? If you did that, inflation now probably is around 22%. Then you can come back and say, well, but food is an important factor that everybody takes in this economy. Why exclude all food items? So we have another measure which says, let us exclude the 8 most volatile items in the food basket. And we have determined those 8 most volatile food items in the basket. We have garden eggs. When these items are out of season, it has a brutal impact on prices. Onions, tomatoes, yams, when they are out of season, the impact is so huge on inflation. So we have another measure. And if you take out all those volatile food items, in addition to prices that are administratively determined, like petrol, electricity prices, and if you take them out of the basket, where are we in terms of inflation? If you did that for all the 5 different measures which the chief is talking about, the inflation rate does not deviate so significantly from the year-on-year inflation.
We'll leave it here. Yeah. This is the point of view. When we come back, we'll go into the Bank of Ghana's books, because this 2023 report seems much, much better than 2022. Dr. Otu will walk us through what has accounted for a relatively better position, although not out of the woods yet. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Point of View. Tonight we're discussing economic management from the monetary side. Guest is Dr. Philippa Brado-Otu, Director of Research at the Bank of Ghana, giving us an exclusive on the economy. We spent the first 20 minutes discussing inflation. Very important because there have been many debates about this. And we are happy that BOG is involved in the debate. He said their main responsibility is price stability, of which inflation is a key one. So it's good to spend some time on this. Exchange rate is also important. Financial stability is important. But we want to look at the financials of the Bank of Ghana, because last year, when they released their reports, people were horrified that the Bank of Ghana had a total loss of 60.8 billion cedis. That was 2022 end of year. As of 2023 end of year, as released this past couple of days, they still made a loss, but it's now 10.5 billion cedis. Now, if you take that 60 billion cedis in 2022, at the time, if the exchange rate in July was 8 cedis to the dollar, that 60 billion would have been about 10% of Ghana's GDP. Because at the time, our GDP was close to $80 billion. But this is 2022 July numbers I'm using.
Yeah, but these numbers are not in dollars.
I know. I'm just making the point. Okay. I'm trying to put it in context.
Okay.
That the 60 billion loss in 2022
is about $5 billion. I don't know how you are calculating it. If the exchange rate is around 8,
yes.
Is it about $7 billion that you're talking about?
But that 7 billion is about 10%, because the GDP was about 72 billion.
Okay,
so
fine.
GDP 72 billion. So the
dollars.
Yes.
Okay.
So if your 60 billion cedis at the time was 10% of GDP.
Okay.
So it was serious.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
You get it?
Yeah.
Now, have you explained to Ghanaians why this 60 was so bad before we even come to why this 80 is much, this 10 is much better? Why did we get 60 billion loss in the year before? 2022. What was the main reason why?
We explained it.
You did?
We did.
We forgot to remind us.
We explained this last year.
Remind us in 1 minute.
I think we said that the biggest one was the impairment we had on the securities that we were holding. You know, just like any other individual, the Bank of Ghana was also holding Government of Ghana securities. Mm-hmm. And out of that 60 billion, 48 billion of that were impairments. That is losses.
This one.
That the accountant. Yeah, I think that one.
Impairment, lost securities.
Correct. 48.
Okay.
So these were losses that we incurred on our books as a result of the domestic debt exchange.
Okay.
But let me explain. You remember that for the debt exchange program, let me be a little bit careful. For the debt exchange program, nobody had a haircut on the principal that the person.
They had haircuts on their
so
interests.
It was restructured,
and then also the tenors.
Yes, interest and then the tenors. For BOG,
so that's also a haircut anyway.
Well, haircut on the interest, haircut on the.
So it's like side haircut, but the top is still there. If the principal is on top and the interest is on the side, side haircut. Yes.
I agree.
Yeah.
Now for the BOG, we had the side haircut, we had the top haircut, and the amount itself was cut into two. We had three. We had to do that because we needed that to secure the IMF program.
So which means that if the IMF, if you hadn't agreed, the IMF program would not have come on. As in the IMF,
it would have been tough to move forward very fast
on that as a condition precedent.
Then we'd have come back to the drawing board and relook at the other parts of the domestic debt.
So in a way, there was pressure from everywhere for that to be accepted. So if you had your way, you may not have accepted to have those impairments. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So 60 billion, 48 of it, but that also means that you still made 12 billion loss. So let's assume that we take the 48 out.
Yeah.
And sorry, I'm going back just for people to understand.
Yeah.
48 out of your 60.
12.
So there was still a 12 billion loss.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money still.
Well,
that's a lot of money, and it's explained here, right? It's explained in all the operating expenses.
It's explained in all the, but look at the big ticket items in the operating expense. Look at what happened to our revaluation loss and exchange differences.
Okay.
The loss was 5 billion also there as well.
This one,
yes. Yeah. And you know, that line basically represents a revaluation of your assets and liabilities. That was in the heat of the crisis when we had lost a lot of foreign assets. So if you look at the balance sheet, the liabilities, which is the negative items of the balance sheet, were more than the assets. And therefore, if you revalue with that sharp exchange rate that we had, the negatives were going to be more than the positives. And that resulted in a loss. This is the exchange rate loss alone of 5 billion.
But the exchange rate is also your remit, right? So it's not like our fault. If you manage the economy well, the exchange rate will not fall. So if you're having a revaluation exchange rate,
the exchange rate is not our remit. Our remit is price stability.
No, your remit is threefold. It's price stability, it's exchange rate stability, and then financial sector stability.
No, if you look in the law, it says price stability.
In the preamble to this report, it does mention all three, but gives greater weight to price stability. If you look in the report, it mentions exchange rate stability too.
Price stability reigns supreme. It's all about price stability.
So the biggest was 5. Let's go through this. The 48 reduced.
Yeah, I mean, if you come to
the impairment loss in securities was less than
what figure do you have there?
So I think it's 606
million.
Yes.
Yeah.
So quite a big, less than a billion.
Yes.
But still a loss nonetheless.
Yes.
The revaluation was actually not that. So from 5 billion to 4.2, so it was still a loss. Yeah. So basically, you're saying this 10 billion is better than this.
Precisely.
But then it means you didn't do anything. All that happened was that this was no longer there. That's why this is better.
But check what happened to your cost of open market operations.
This one, the first one.
Correct. So we see
it rose from 1.7 to 8.3.
That's another 8 billion extra cost that we incurred in 2023. The question is why?
So let's make it easy. Open market operation is essentially you lending.
Oh, so when we embark on open market operation, all what we are saying is that we think there's too much liquidity out there in the economy, and we need to clean it up, because if we don't, it affects our mandate and it pushes inflation up. So we had to clean. And basically what we do is that we offer the banks securities, give them securities, and then they give us the monies that they have to be locked up for a period of time, so as not to prevent that money from slipping into the economy to cause all this havoc.
So, but why is the cost so high? Because you paid them such a high rate on it.
No, the cost is so high because interest rates were generally high in the economy.
Now, who caused the interest rate?
Well, because we are fighting inflation.
But inflation is not. Actually, we are back to square one.
You're back to square one.
Because
you're back to
look at
square
this.
one.
Your interest income, your main income, increased from 5 billion to 7 billion. Or let's use it here, 5 billion to 7 billion. So you've increased your income, but then the cost of the it's almost like the cost of the amount of money you got also ballooned from 1.7 to 8.3. Well, largely because of your interest rate policy.
Well,
so basically your net is less than 400 million.
It's the liquidity overhang. The liquidity overhang in the economy which needed to be cleaned was a lot.
Which liquidity? Well, okay, have you ever given us as a central bank what is the optimal liquidity? Because if you say, and this is a theoretical argument, if you say there's excess liquidity in the country, if you tell me something is excess, if there's excess fat in my body, then the optimal fat should be a certain level. The Bank of Ghana has never told us since records started what is optimal liquidity. And yet you keep saying there's excess liquidity. What is excess liquidity?
That can be determined. That can be determined. That can be determined. You know, I don't want to go into the mechanics of how to determine excess liquidity through money supply increases in the economy. But the basic thing is that if you look at money supply in the economy in 2020, 2022, it went significantly high. And this was way above that quantity of money that needs to support economic activity.
I already said it's 11%. Only 11% of that was inflationary. You explained that. So that shouldn't be. I keep pushing back on the liquidity issue because a lot of people say to me that when the Bank of Ghana says there's extra liquidity in the economy, it seems very textbook because people actually don't have money. So where is the liquidity within the banking sector? Is it within the savings and loans? Is it within the forex market? Because an economy with excess liquidity, people have not been paid. Look, their contractors were owed almost 50 billion. They only paid part recently. A lot of people who have government contractors, a lot of private companies are owed all across. People go for scholarships, they are not paid. How nurses trainings have not been paid, right? So how do you say there's excess liquidity in an economy when on the real side, most people say their monies are not? I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
Yeah. I don't know if you are familiar with the basic quantity theory of money. It's a simple identity which says that the stock of money at any point in time in the economy and the velocity at which that money moves impacts prices and output in the economy.
True.
So the money is doing two things. It is impacting prices. It is impacting economic activity, which is what you are talking about. So M has two functions, on price and Y.
Is it M1 or M2 plus? Which M are you talking about?
Both ways.
All of this.
Because of course, I don't want to be technical. I don't want to go in there. But the basic fact is that at the beginning of the year, when the finance minister comes out and he reads his budget and he says, I want to achieve a certain growth rate, I want to achieve a certain price level in the economy, that growth rate and that price that he wants to achieve in the economy is consistent with a certain money supply level in the economy. That, you cannot take that away. All economies do that. Now the question is, if along the line you begin to realize that your money supply levels are going above the levels that are consistent with inflation and economic activity, then there is excess somewhere in the economy. That's how we look at it from the central bank point of view.
So in your view, the reason why we still had a 10 billion CD loss.
Yes.
Even though better than a 60 billion, is because the cost of your open market operations was high.
I mean, look at
one of the main reasons.
It's 80% of the 10.
And that is driven, and that is basically saying that when you did the open market operations to mop up excess liquidity, you paid a high interest on it.
Well, because it was done within a high interest rate environment. It was done within a high.
So it means that open market operations were not effective.
The question
because just let me explain for people. You want to remove excess liquidity from the market, so you go and sell bonds for people to buy, so their money excess comes to you. But when you are paying them back, you pay them back more than you earn in interest. So essentially, your OMO costs 90.
Well, so you see, the central bank is not a commercial bank. The central bank is a policy institution. What you should be looking at, when I started my submission, I said our key objective in all what we do is price stability. I would have been worried if after all these OMO operations, inflation still stayed at that 54%. But inflation slipped, and it slipped all the way to 23%. It's a public good that the central bank gave to the economy in terms of its operations. Don't look at it in terms of the cost, like this is a commercial bank. And anyway, Bernard, mind you, where did all this money go? Ask yourself, who were the holders of this expense that we made? It's the banks.
So, but that's the other point. Dr. Philip, the policy options you choose makes Ghana's banking sector the most profitable on the continent, but it doesn't get the sector. So the fact that the banks are making profit because of your interest rate policy doesn't benefit people like me. So the fact that the banking is doing well, in fact, a lot of times, generally in the world, bank profitability is almost counter-cyclical. When the economy is not doing well, banks do well. Because the purpose of a bank is not to make profit. The purpose of a bank is to do financial intermediation, lend money to agric, to construction, to transport. But if they are making profit, they are not doing their job. So the fact that the banking sector is doing well, you still haven't succeeded, because your job is not to make banks profitable. Your job is to make sure that they send money to those who need it to produce, and they are not doing it.
My job is to control and contain inflation. Period. I know it's hard for you to understand, but that is my job. That is my job. 80% of that. Look, you must look at it as the cost we incurred in bringing inflation down. If you look at it from that perspective, you'll be fine. It's the cost we incurred.
But the inflation you brought down has not benefited me, because I still cannot borrow from a bank. What I'm saying is that
the inflation is still coming down.
Which inflation?
That inflation.
The year on year.
That inflation that is being reported. Bernard, the standard and the norm everywhere, the policies that the Fed is making is based on a year-on-year measure of inflation. And then alongside that year-on-year measure, they complement it with core measures of inflation. That is how it's done. That is how it's done. So that is what has happened. The cost of bringing inflation down is what we are seeing here on this balance sheet. If you look at it in terms of the broader economy, don't look at it in terms of a commercial bank operating, making losses. And of course, the other big question is that were we even policy solvent?
We'll answer that when we come back.
Okay.
Because I noticed you put that in the report.
Who put it? Is it we or the?
We'll come back and deal with that. Deal with that. This is the point of view. Don't go away.
Okay.
Welcome back. Tonight, the point of view is heavy lifting, some economics. Thankfully, my guest is not being technical. It's being very straight to the point. Dr. Philip Abrado, head of research, Bank of Ghana. Started off by looking at inflation, debated a bit around whether the year-on-year was the best measure. We'll leave that to the other economists. We're looking at various items on their balance sheet. Loss of 60 billion 2022, better now 10 billion. Some argue it could be better because 10 billion is still a lot of money. Now, in fact, there was a main question around the moral authority of the central bank in in regulating banks if the banks were not doing well when you were making a loss, and you wanted to separate general insolvency from policy insolvency. So if you can elaborate on why, even though this is a loss, you in fact the report mentions that what is of interest to the central bank, I think page 55, is policy insolvency. What is insolvency, and why should the public take note of that instead of other kinds of insolvency?
No, because I recollect in 2022, the main argument was that we had made such a huge loss, and therefore going forward, we may not be able to operate because of that huge loss, which had affected our equity position. We came out and then we explained and we said that the central bank is a policy institution. The central bank will continue to remain policy solvent, and for so long as we remain policy solvent, the central bank can continue to operate. The question is, what is policy solvency? I think that's what we are looking at.
Yeah.
And from a policy institution point of view, the central bank is policy solvent if it's able to generate enough income to cover the cost of its policy operations or open market operations. Bottom line, in simple language terms, that is it. So forget about all the other cost items on the balance sheet of the central bank, but because the central bank has a mandate to control inflation and it has certain tools that it uses to control inflation, if you can generate enough income to cover the cost of your monetary policy operations, you are deemed to be policy solvent.
And so you are not worried about the solvency position so long as you can continue with your operations. But there's a view that there are items in your balance sheet that you need to control better. So for example, your other operating expenses, when you come down, your personnel costs went up by 20%.
I haven't looked too deep into...
I'll give you an example. Your personnel costs in 2022, 1.6 billion went to 1.9.
Where is that?
All right. I'm now coming to the details of other operating expenses. So when you come to other operating expenses of 3.8, when you go into the details of that, a lot of your expenses went up. Your personnel costs went up by 20%. Your official travel went up by 35%. Your capacity development went up by 140%. Just doing a variance analysis of this to this. So basically, we've just taken this.
But at the global level, I think the figure moved from what? Is it?
It moved from... It moved from
3.8 or
3.2 to 3.8. So
3.2 to 3.8. That's
That's much higher. All right. Again, if you even came to your revaluation loss, there's a component of that which is a revaluation based on price movement in gold holdings. Again, we had losses there. Don't forget that one of your big policies.
I don't want to go too deep into.
But the question I'm asking is
other
that,
things.
Fair enough. Let's take away all the impairments. If you look at where the economy has been since August 2022, is it fair for the central bank to have higher expense on personnel, higher expense on capacity development, higher expense on motor vehicle and insurance? In fact, of all the cost items and the other operating expense, the only three that didn't increase was banking supervision expenses, which reduced by 25%, and then directors' fees, which reduced by 8.3%.
I don't want to go too deep.
But these are important, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. But I don't want to go too deep into those things because I haven't had time to study and even question these other guys on this other.
But what is the Bank of Ghana's message? Because don't forget that the brouhaha around all of this last year, when the 60 billion came, was not just the 48 billion, but on the various items that had been expended. So one would have expected that at least.
So we did some analysis, and if you measure all these things also in terms of GDP, you don't see any significant movement in these things. You know, when you have nominal figures and you are describing the nominal figures and looking at changes from one year to the other, the best way around is to look at it in terms of GDP. If you did that, you would see that those changes are very, very small. Those changes are.
But why should we use GDP? Because we are talking about the efficiency of an institution and how much it spends on itself when the economy is going through challenges. So I understand the GDP point, but why should you be spending more on personnel, spending more on, because in fact people have analyzed even the average amount you spend per staff is very high.
But
why should that be a GDP conversation?
But no, let's leave the GDP conversation out. I don't want to go there. But you see, Bernard, the things we do as a central bank is a lot. I don't want to sit on and talk about some of these things, but we do a lot of things, and the staff does a lot in terms of where they go for information, how they move currency, specie all over the country. It involves a lot, especially when fuel prices are also going up. So these are things that impact the balance sheet of the central bank. So let's not just take the numbers on the face of it, but we must also look at it in the context of even the broader economy and external factors hitting the balance sheet of the Bernard. We've moved from 60 to a loss of 10. And out of that loss of 10, 80% is cost of operations, our monetary policy operations to deliver inflation, to deliver that public good, to deliver that commodity for which we were set up as a central bank.
So by when do you expect to break even?
And had it not been for the cost of operations, I'm sure
your loss would have been 2 billion.
Yeah.
But 2 billion is a lot of money.
It is.
I know that because central bank are big, 2 billion is a lot of. I mean, I've not seen 2 billion in my life before.
No, but I haven't even seen it. So I see it on paper.
I understand where you are going when you say the cost of open market operations was 8, which amounted for 80% of the loss. But still, so are you telling me that this year you are selling treasury bills? I mean, the government is selling treasury bills, right? Are you telling me that this 8 billion figure will come down next year?
I'm sure when we get into 2024, that amount, because the open market operations this year, you would realize that the figures that will be published for 2024 will not have this high figure of 8 billion in there. So let's wait and let's see how. You see, it's an evolving process. 60, 10. You are talking about break even. Is it next year or is it in 2025? And of course, the other issue too is that government is committed to recapitalize the central bank. So that commitment has come from the Ministry of Finance, and that will really help with our numbers as we move along.
So that's one positive note to end on.
Yeah.
Do we know when the money is coming?
Which money?
The recapitalization, is it this quarter or we are in June?
Oh, the talks have begun. The IMF, the Bank of Ghana, the Ministry of Finance. I don't know the form in which it is going to come. Is it cash or is it a mixture of cash and bonds? That is still being discussed.
But it will be this year?
It will be this year.
So the Bank of Ghana will be recapitalized this year?
There will be some form of recapitalization to help the balance sheet.
That's heartwarming to hear. Thank you, Dr. Philip Abroad-Wotu.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on air to allow us to subject you to a lot of hard questions. But I think it's part of your responsibility. That's the Director of Research who's come out to speak to us on the improving position of their balance sheet with a promise that after recapitalization, they will move from the red into, if not even green, black. Thanks for watching tonight's edition of The Point of View. We'll see you next time. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.